It was the grinding. That's the sound that sticks with you, not the shriek that followed, though that was impressive in its own way. A banshee wail of pure suburban outrage. No, it was the protracted, agonizing scrape of steel against asphalt, the sickening crunch of plastic meeting unforgiving force, the delicate tinkling of safety glass surrendering to overwhelming pressure. It was the sound of my Saturday morning, meticulously planned around avoiding a $30 fine for an errant garden gnome, dissolving into a symphony of destruction. 1 minute I was kneeling, diligently pulling weeds from a flower bed that screamed Stepford wives louder than any picket fence. The next I was behind the wheel of the Rhino, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, a primal fury thrumming in my chest. Brenda McLaughlin's pristine pearl-white Volvo XC90, the vehicular embodiment of her HOA tyranny, was no longer blocking the ambulance. It was now a crumpled testament to the limitations of bylaws when faced with a genuine, breathing, tiny human emergency, and a man who'd finally, irrevocably, had enough. The ambulance, its lights still flashing with desperate urgency, was accelerating down our cul-de-sac, the Doppler effect of its fading siren, a stark reminder of the precious seconds we'd just clawed back. In its belly, a newborn was fighting for life, a battle Brenda's misplaced sense of suburban order had nearly cost. And me? I was just getting started. Let's rewind a few minutes, shall we? To the blissful ignorance of a Saturday morning in pristine meadows, a subdivision so meticulously manicured it felt less like a neighborhood and more like an open-air museum exhibit on the American Dream Suburbia edition. Every blade of grass seemed to stand at attention. Every mailbox was a carbon copy of its neighbor. And the very air hummed with the unspoken threat of a violation notice for unapproved bird feeders, my penance for the privilege of living in this meticulously regulated paradise. Weeding. On my hands and knees, in gardening gloves that made my fingers feel like they were wrestling over stuffed sausages. This was Sarah's dream, this quiet, suburban life. "A yard for Buster!" she'd enthused, picturing idyllic scenes of our golden retriever frolicking in a verdant expanse. What the real estate brochure conveniently omitted was the fine print. All frolicking must adhere to Article 4, Section B, Subsection C, Lawn Integrity, which, as far as I could tell, translated to, Buster is allowed to look at the grass, but any actual contact is strictly prohibited. Speaking of Buster, the furry little anarchist was currently engaged in open rebellion against lawn integrity about 3 feet to my left, his tail wagging furiously as he excavated what appeared to be the archaeological site of a long-lost squirrel civilization. Any other day, I'd be yelling at him. Today, a strange sort of camaraderie existed between us. Two souls chafing under the yoke of pristine meadows' oppressive perfection. My only real solace in this verdant prison was parked in my driveway. The Rhino. It's a Ford F-350 dually, but that's like saying Godzilla was just a lizard with a thyroid problem. This beast had been lifted so high, it practically required an FAA beacon. Massive off-road tires that looked like they'd been stolen from a monster truck rally filled the wheel wells. A custom-forged steel bumper, more akin to a medieval siege ram than something you'd see on a grocery run, adorned the front. And the whole thing was coated in a matte gray that seemed to absorb light and radiate pure, unapologetic menace in a neighborhood awash in sensible metallics. The Rhino wasn't just a truck. It was my middle finger raised defiantly at the very notion of blending in. "You know," Sarah said, emerging from the house with a steaming mug, "from a distance, you almost look like you enjoy this." I straightened up, my knees protesting the sudden change in altitude, and accepted the coffee. It's a performance, honey, for the warden. I'm pretty sure Brenda has a drone equipped with thermal imaging to monitor my horticultural compliance. If I pause for longer than 87 seconds, a citation probably gets auto-generated. Sarah chuckled, her blonde ponytail swaying gently. Oh, stop. Brenda's not that bad. Not that bad? I scoffed, taking a much-needed gulp of coffee. Last week, she sent me a certified letter because my garden gnome, Bartholomew, for your information, was sporting a non-conforming shade of crimson on his pointy little hat. Included was a paint swatch of approved cherry red. Approved by whom, I'd like to know. The Department of Interdimensional Gnome Hue Regulation? Just as Sarah was about to offer a diplomatic counterpoint, the harbinger of doom arrived. Not on a pale horse, but on an electric golf cart, driven by a woman whose crisp, white tennis attire somehow managed to exude the same level of icy authority as a five-star general in full-dress uniform. Brenda McLaughlin, president of the Pristine Meadows Homeowners Association, was on her morning patrol. Her golf cart, being electric, glided with an unnerving silence. You didn't hear her coming. You just sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a sudden drop in barometric pressure accompanied by an overwhelming urge to confess to any and all minor infractions you might have ever committed. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, her gaze not on me, still kneeling amidst the petunias, but on the rhino. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disapproval, as if my truck had personally insulted her prize-winning petunias. Here she comes, my internal monologue groaned. The chairman, the grand poobah of petty rules. Her golf cart probably runs on the tears of non-compliant homeowners. Miller, she stated, her tone as crisp as her tennis whites, completely bypassing any semblance of a greeting. The bylaws are unequivocal. All vehicles must be parked entirely on a paved surface. I have observed that the rear right tire of your vehicle is encroaching upon the lawn by, and I estimate with considerable precision, a full 1.5 inches. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. Morning to you too, Brenda. And it's a work truck. I haul equipment with it. The covenants make absolutely no distinction for work trucks, Mr. Miller, particularly those of that particular aesthetic, she said. Her lips pursed as if the very word aesthetic left a bad taste in her mouth. It lowers the tone of the neighborhood, and consequently the property values. Consider this your verbal warning. The next infraction will result in a written citation and a $30 fine, as outlined in Schedule B, Paragraph 3, Subsection 2. Got it, I said, trying to keep the sarcasm from dripping too heavily. I'll have a stern word with the tire. Tell it to be more considerate of the delicate ecosystem of the Bermuda grass next time. She bestowed upon me a tight, mirthless smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that promised future bureaucratic torment. Then, with a subtle flick of her wrist, she put the golf cart in reverse and glided silently away, leaving me standing in my perfectly imperfect garden, the simmering resentment in my chest threatening to boil over. A few minutes later, just as the tension in my shoulders was starting to ease, the idyllic suburban quiet was ripped apart. The sharp, insistent wail of a siren cut through the still air, growing rapidly louder. This wasn't the distant drone of emergency services somewhere across town. This was coming down our street. An ambulance, lights flashing a frantic strobe against the manicured lawns, screeched to a halt directly in front of the Wilsons' house, 2 doors down. Sarah and I exchanged a look of immediate concern. The Wilsons were a young couple. Their first baby, a little girl named Lily, had only come home from the hospital a few weeks ago. "That's not a fire truck," I muttered, my stomach clenching. "That's the get out of the way or someone dies siren." We watched from our porch as two paramedics, their faces grim and set, practically sprinted towards the Wilsons' front door, hauling a gurney and medical bags. Other neighbors, drawn by the commotion, started to peek out from behind their perfectly aligned curtains. The air, moments before thick with the unspoken tension of HOA regulations, now crackled with a raw, primal fear. Time seemed to warp and stretch. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. Finally, the paramedics emerged from the house, their movements even more urgent than before. And then we saw it. On the gurney, strapped securely in place, was a neonatal transport incubator, a clear plastic box filled with a bewildering array of tubes, wires, and blinking lights. Inside, impossibly small and fragile, lay a baby, Lily Wilson. Her father, Tom, followed the gurney, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own sudden, heart-stopping fear. "Oh, hell," my internal voice screamed. "That's not just a sick kid. That's a brand new human being fighting for every single breath." My own petty grievances with Brenda and her paint swatches shriveled into insignificance, as small and pathetic as dust bunnies under the couch. All that mattered now was the tiny life inside that incubator and the desperate race against time. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a heavy thud. The driver hit the horn, a sharp, impatient blast that echoed the urgency of the situation, and started to pull away from the curb. And then it happened. The ambulance lurched to a sudden, screeching halt. A pristine white Volvo XC90 had pulled out of Brenda McLaughlin's driveway and was now parked diagonally across the street, forming an impenetrable barrier. Brenda herself emerged from the driver's seat, her arms crossed, her expression one of unwavering self-righteousness. She had her phone pressed to her ear. "Ma'am," the paramedic leaning out of the driver's side window yelled, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. "You need to move your vehicle immediately. We have a critical patient." Brenda, utterly unfazed, continued speaking calmly into her phone. "Yes, I am reporting an unauthorized commercial vehicle speeding on a private residential lane. Their siren is also in clear violation of Noise Ordinance 3.2b. It is causing undue distress." Tom Wilson, his face a mask of desperation, ran to Brenda's car. "Brenda, what in God's name are you doing? That's my daughter in that ambulance. She can't breathe. We have to get her to the hospital." His voice cracked on the last word, the raw agony in his plea enough to melt the heart of a stone. But Brenda remained unmoved, her gaze fixed on the ambulance. According to Article 7, Section D of the Pristine Meadows Covenants, non-residential vehicles exceeding a gross weight of 2 tons are required to obtain a 48-hour permit from the board prior to utilizing our roadways. I see no such permit displayed on their windshield. They will need to turn around and find an alternate route. "Turn around!" the paramedic roared, his face contorted in disbelief and fury. "This is a dead-end street. Ma'am, you are actively obstructing an emergency medical vehicle. That is a felony. Move this car right now or I swear I will have you arrested myself." Brenda finally lowered her phone, her eyes narrowing. "Don't you threaten me. I know my rights, and I know these bylaws. This is private property, and I will not have it used as a thoroughfare for oversized, unpermitted vehicles, regardless of their alleged emergency." She punctuated the last 2 words with a dismissive wave of her hand. My brain felt like it had hit a brick wall. It was surreal, like watching a train wreck in slow motion. How could someone be so utterly, completely detached from the reality of the situation? The flashing lights, the siren's desperate cry, the father's tears, the tiny, fragile life hanging in the balance, none of it seemed to penetrate her fortress of rules and regulations. All that mattered was the sacred text of the HOA bylaws. And then I saw it. A subtle tremor in the paramedic's hands as he gripped the steering wheel, the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. the sheer, raw terror in his eyes. They didn't have time for alternate routes. They didn't have time to wait for the police to arrive and sort out Brenda's bureaucratic blockade. They had minutes, maybe even seconds. And in those precious seconds, a baby's life was slipping away. My gaze locked with Tom Wilson's. His eyes were pleading, a silent scream for help etched on his face. Then I looked back at the ambulance, at the frantic movements inside, at the almost imperceptible rise and fall of the tiny chest within the incubator. And in that moment, the carefully constructed dam of my suburban civility finally, irrevocably burst. It wasn't a conscious decision, not a logical weighing of pros and cons. It was a pure, visceral reaction, the mental flowchart that usually guided my actions, complete with branches for sarcastic remark, passive-aggressive compliance, and wait and see if it blows over, collapsed into a single, stark directive. Fix this now. I turned to Sarah, my voice low and urgent. Get your phone. What? Jack, what are you doing? She asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Get your phone, I repeated, my voice leaving no room for argument, and record everything, point it at her car. Without waiting for a response, I walked, with a strange sense of calm focus, towards my garage. No running, no shouting, just a deliberate, unwavering purpose in my stride. I hit the button to raise the garage door, the mechanical whine a stark counterpoint to the tense silence of the street. There, bathed in the dim garage light, sat the Rhino. I opened the driver's side door and slid behind the wheel. The familiar scent of leather and diesel filled my nostrils. My hand found the ignition, the key turning with a solid click. The massive diesel engine didn't just start, it roared to life, a guttural bellow that shattered the suburban stillness, a primal scream of defiance against the suffocating silence of Brenda's tyranny. The sound made everyone, Brenda, still standing defiantly by her Volvo, the paramedics frozen in disbelief, the neighbors gaping from their porches, turn and stare. I backed the Rhino out of the garage, the oversized tires crunching on the stray pebbles on the driveway. I didn't pull onto the street. Instead, I turned the wheel and drove directly over my own meticulously maintained lawn, the heavy tires leaving deep, angry trenches in the precious Bermuda grass. I positioned the truck so that its custom steel bumper was aligned perfectly with the driver's side doors of Brenda's pristine Volvo. It was like a predator lining up its prey. The world has narrowed, my internal monologue declared. It's just my truck, her car, and the open road behind it. I could hear distant shouting, but it was muffled, as if coming from underwater. Sarah was standing on our porch, her phone held steady, recording everything. Tom Wilson stood frozen near the ambulance, his face a terrifying blend of hope and horror. And Brenda was finally looking at me, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with a dawning comprehension of the sheer, unadulterated audacity of what I was about to do. Her iron grip on the illusion of her own suburban sovereignty was about to meet a very real, very heavy, and very unstoppable force. I rolled down my window. My voice, surprisingly, was calm, dangerously so. Brenda, for the last time, move your car. Her initial shock seemed to have worn off, replaced by a renewed surge of outrage. You are destroying your own property, Miller. That's a $200 fine. And if you so much as scratch my vehicle, I will sue you for everything you have. Everything. Okay, I said simply, and rolled my window back up. I glanced at the ambulance driver, gave him a short, sharp nod. Then I put the Rhino in drive. I didn't slam on the gas. There was no need for dramatic acceleration. I simply pressed the pedal. The engine growled, The massive tires bit into the ravaged lawn, and the 2 tons of steel began to move forward. The moment of contact wasn't a violent crash, but a horrifying, protracted grinding. The sound of metal being twisted and torn, the sickening crunch of the Volvo's frame deforming under the relentless pressure, the high-pitched squeal of tires fighting for traction on the asphalt. Then came the delicate, almost musical tinkle as the driver's side window imploded, showering the pristine interior with shards of glass. The Volvo didn't stand a chance. It was like a fly trying to stop a charging rhino. The rhino pushed it effortlessly, scraping it across the asphalt with a sound that made your teeth ache, up over the curb with a jarring thud, and onto Brenda's own award-winning, perfectly manicured lawn. It came to a rest with its front end embedded in her prize-winning rose bushes, the once perfect white paint now marred by deep scratches and the indignity of crushed foliage. The path was clear. The ambulance didn't hesitate. It lurched forward, its horn blaring once, a single triumphant note that echoed the collective relief of everyone who had witnessed Brenda's callous obstruction. I watched it go, making sure it had a clear path, before finally putting the rhino in reverse. I backed up slowly, deliberately, leaving the mangled Volvo sitting like a bizarre, abstract sculpture on Brenda's ravaged lawn. There, my internal monologue declared, a strange sense of detached satisfaction washing over me. Street to Helipad run cleared. The hospital was only a few minutes away. The rooftop helipad waiting for the critically ill newborn. Those precious minutes I had just bought. I could only pray to whatever powers that be that it was enough. A profound, almost eerie silence descended upon pristine meadows. The only sounds were the gentle ticking of the rhino's cooling engine and the chirping of a bird, seemingly oblivious to the suburban drama that had just unfolded. Then, the silence shattered. Brenda McLaughlin unleashed a shriek that could curdle milk at 50 paces. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, a primal scream ripped from the depths of her meticulously maintained soul. "My car! My roses, you maniac! You hooligan! I'm calling the police! You're going to jail for the rest of your life!" I killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying Brenda's tirade. I got out of the rhino and leaned against the hood, my arms crossed, watching her meltdown with a strange sense of detachment. I even took a calm sip of the lukewarm coffee Sarah had brought me earlier, which had been sitting forgotten in my cup holder. I said nothing. My silence seemed to fuel her fury even more than any sarcastic retort I could have offered. The street, moments before deserted, was now teeming with neighbors. Some stood with their mouths agape, their faces etched with shock and horror. Others, I noticed with a flicker of grim amusement, were trying, and failing, to suppress their smiles. Old Mr. Henderson, whose prize-winning petunias Brenda had once cited for being a shade too vibrant, gave me a slow, deliberate nod of what could only be described as profound respect. The arrival of the police was surprisingly swift. The flashing blue and red lights painting the pristine facades of pristine meadows in a dramatic, almost cinematic glow. 2 cruisers pulled up, one after the other, much faster than I would have expected for a neighborhood known for its lack of actual crime. The paramedics must have radioed ahead, painting a vivid picture of the suburban showdown. 2 officers emerged. Officer Miller, a calm, slightly world-weary veteran in his late 40s, and Officer Jenkins, a younger, more by-the-book cop whose crisp uniform looked like it had just been unwrapped. Jenkins, his hand instinctively hovering near his sidearm, approached me first. "Sir, did you just ram that vehicle?" "I moved it," I corrected him calmly. "It was obstructing an emergency vehicle. There's a baby in that ambulance." Brenda, her face red and contorted with fury, rushed over, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's a menace! Arrest him! He assaulted me with his truck!" Officer Miller, his gaze steady, addressed Brenda. "Ma'am, please step back and allow us to assess the situation." He then turned his attention back to me. "So, Mr. Miller, you're saying you intentionally struck her vehicle to move it?" Sarah, bless her quick-thinking heart, stepped forward, her phone held aloft. "He did what he had to do, officer. I have the entire incident on video, including Miss McLaughlin refusing a direct order from a paramedic to move her car while they were trying to transport a critically ill newborn." Officer Miller nodded slowly and took Sarah's phone, his eyes scanning the video. His expression remained impassive, but I saw a flicker of something, perhaps understanding, perhaps just weariness, in his gaze as he glanced at Jenkins, who now looked distinctly conflicted. The radio crackled on Officer Miller's shoulder, and I could hear snippets of the paramedic's account of the events. "This is the tricky part," my internal monologue mused. "On the one hand, I'm the guy who potentially saved a baby's life. On the other hand, I just turned a rather expensive SUV into a lawn ornament. The law, I knew, could be infuriatingly literal when it came to things like property damage. I was banking on Officer Miller's "seen it all, nothing surprises me anymore" demeanor, outweighing Jenkins' fresh out of the academy zeal for upholding the letter of the law. After a few tense minutes, Officer Miller handed Sarah back her phone. "Okay," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Here's what's going to happen. Nobody's going to jail today. Miss McLaughlin, you have the right to file a report for property damage, and I suggest you do so through the proper channels. Mr. Miller, you will likely need to speak with your insurance company. We will be filing a comprehensive report on this entire incident, and the district attorney's office will ultimately decide how to proceed." Jenkins looked aghast. "But Sarge, that's felony vandalism." Officer Miller leaned in slightly, his voice low and speaking directly to Jenkins. "It's also a textbook case of necessity defense, son. Do you really want to be the officer on the 5 o'clock news who arrested the guy who saved a baby's life because of an HOA dispute over parking bylaws? Just write the report, Jenkins." The next morning, Brenda's mangled Volvo was gone, presumably whisked away to a body shop where automotive surgeons would attempt to piece its shattered dignity back together. Brenda's front lawn, however, remained a testament to the rhino's decisive intervention. Deep tire ruts scarred the once perfect turf, and the remnants of her prized rose bushes lay scattered like crimson casualties of war. Dave, my friend and the owner of a landscaping company whose motto should probably be, "We fix what you broke," usually deliberately, surveyed the scene with a professional eye. He whistled softly, running a hand through his thick salt and pepper beard. "Wow, Jack," he said, shaking his head. "You really did a number on this place. I mean, professionally speaking, the soil compaction in these ruts is going to be a real headache. But personally, a work of brutal, poetic art. 10 out of 10 for sheer audacity." "Her insurance is going to come after mine," I said, sighing. "I want to get ahead of it. I want to fix it, Dave. Fix it all. The lawn, the sprinkler lines I probably pulverized, the roses, everything." Dave grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Fix it? Buddy, for what you pulled, we can make it better. I'm talking a full sod replacement with premium Kentucky bluegrass. We can install a state-of-the-art multi-zone sprinkler system with smart controls. And for the roses? Forget those spindly things. We'll put in a gorgeous little stone retaining wall with some knockout, disease-resistant varieties. It'll be the nicest damn lawn on the entire block. It'll drive her absolutely stark raving mad." A slow smile spread across my face. "That's the pettiest, most gloriously constructive idea I've ever heard. I love it. Draw up a quote, Dave. Spare no expense." "The best revenge isn't living well," my internal monologue purred. It's forcing your enemy to live next to an objectively superior landscape that they can't possibly complain about without looking like a complete monster. Checkmate, Brenda. Against my initial, slightly paranoid reservations, Sarah had uploaded the video of the rhino's rescue mission online. Her caption was simple and to the point. My husband had to make a choice today. #HOA hero, #baby rescue. It went viral faster than a cat video convention in a room full of laser pointers. My phone became a relentless, buzzing menace, notifications flooding in from every corner of the internet. Local news vans materialized on our quiet street like metallic mushrooms after a rainstorm. Headlines screamed from every website I dared to click on. Suburban dad uses monster truck to save newborn from HOA president's bylaw blockade. A GoFundMe campaign, started by a complete stranger with the hashtag #RhinoRescueFund, blew past its initial goal of $5,000 in under an hour. Memes featuring the rhino in heroic poses, set to the soaring theme music from action movies, proliferated across social media. Then came a knock on the door that actually made my heart skip a beat. But not out of fear. Tom and Mary Wilson stood on my porch, Mary's eyes red and swollen, but this time they weren't filled with terror. We just came from the hospital, Mary said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily, she's stable. The doctor said her condition, it's all about oxygen. He said those 2 or 3 minutes. The time you bought her. That was everything. That was the difference. Tom stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his grip firm and filled with gratitude. We don't know how to thank you, Jack. You saved our little girl's life. Standing there on my porch, looking into their tear-filled eyes, the weight of the past 24 hours seemed to lift. All the potential lawsuits, the inevitable HOA fines, though, ironically, Brenda was in no position to issue any at the moment, the not inconsiderable cost of Dave's landscaping extravaganza. It all just faded away. I looked at this young couple, their entire world hanging precariously by a thread just hours ago, and I knew with an absolute certainty that resonated deep within my bones that I would do it again in a heartbeat. I'd have driven the rhino through Brenda's entire house, rose bushes and all, if that's what it had taken. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room, usually reserved for tedious discussions about acceptable holiday decorations and the proper disposal of yard waste. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was anything but sterile. The room was packed, buzzing with a palpable energy that felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a revolutionary council. Brenda, looking pale and disheveled, tried to take the floor, clutching her ever-present 3-ring binder like a shield. She opened her mouth, presumably to launch into a detailed recitation of my numerous bylaw violations, but was immediately drowned out by a chorus of angry voices. "Brenda, sit down!" Mr. Henderson, his voice booming with uncharacteristic authority, was on his feet, pointing a trembling finger. "We are not here to discuss Mr. Miller's lawn or your dented Volvo. We are here to discuss your complete and utter lack of basic human decency." Another neighbor, a usually timid woman named Mrs. Davies, chimed in, her voice surprisingly strong. "I have the letter you sent me about my son's basketball hoop being a visual blight, right here. Was that more important than a baby's life, too?" Brenda, her composure finally starting to crack, stammered. But the bylaws. They protect our property values. They are what separate us from chaos." Mr. Henderson stepped forward. "We're voting you out, Brenda, effective immediately. And our first motion under the new, sane leadership will be to create the Jack Miller bylaw. In the event of a legitimate, verifiable life or death emergency, all other HOA bylaws are temporarily suspended. Furthermore, Any attempt to obstruct emergency services will be met with immediate and severe disapproval. The last word was delivered with a pointed glare at Brenda. The motion was passed with a resounding roar of approval that shook the very foundations of the clubhouse. Brenda sank into her chair, her binder of rules suddenly looking pathetic and useless, the weight of her self-imposed authority finally crushing her. A few weeks later, a sense of normalcy, albeit a slightly altered one, had returned to pristine meadows. Dave's landscaping crew was long gone, leaving Brenda's front lawn a lush emerald carpet of Kentucky bluegrass, bordered by a tasteful stone retaining wall overflowing with vibrant, disease-resistant roses. It was, objectively speaking, the most aesthetically pleasing corner of the entire subdivision. Brenda herself remained a recluse, her white Volvo replaced by a more subdued, less conspicuously judgmental sedan. My lawyer called with the news I'd been cautiously optimistic about. The district attorney's office had officially declined to press charges, citing the overwhelming evidence for the necessity defense and the clear benefit to the public good. My insurance company, after reviewing Sarah's now famous video and gauging the overwhelming public support for the HOA hero, had agreed to cover the cost of the lawn renovation as a gesture of goodwill. Brenda's insurance, as it turned out, was less forgiving of her. Parking choices. It was another Saturday morning. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a cup of coffee. The Rhino, freshly washed and gleaming, was parked perfectly within the lines of my driveway. Buster, the reformed lawn terrorist, was snoozing contentedly at my feet. The Wilsons strolled by, pushing a stroller containing a healthy, gurgling baby Lily. They waved, and I waved back. The new HOA president, Mr. Henderson, cruised past in his golf cart, giving me a wink and a thumbs up. Sarah was right, my internal monologue conceded, a genuine smile spreading across my face. It is a nice neighborhood. We've got friendly neighbors. A yard for the dog, as long as he respects the Kentucky bluegrass. All it took to find the peace and quiet was one glorious, righteous, property-damaging act of suburban defiance. I took a sip of my coffee and glanced over at the Rhino. It was just a truck, I supposed, but sometimes the right tool for the job isn't a wrench or a hammer. Sometimes it's 4 tons of American steel and a driver who's finally, irrevocably, had enough. And my garden gnome, Bartholomew? His pointy little hat was now sporting the brightest, most gloriously non-compliant shade of crimson I could find. Let them send me the fine. I'd frame it. It would look rather fetching next to my HOA hero coffee mug.